Hey everybody, welcome to the study session. Well, let's get you all conditioned for your exam that's tomorrow. So welcome, hope you are having a great evening, and I'm glad that you can join us tonight. Let me get everything situated here, and we'll get going. So let's take a quick look at everybody who's here, and we'll take a look at the chat here. And let's see, everybody who's here. Let me get that opened. Okay. Gotta find it here, because it's definitely not coming up right away. So hope everybody's happy tonight, and we'll get you guys all set up here. We're going to follow our agenda just a little bit. We're going to, here we go, let's see. Joseph Tang. This mixtape is on fire. Okay. So Sam, your question is, how many questions is the test, and is there an FRQ? And in short, yes. I'm sorry. I'm not going to do the FRQ tomorrow, only because it gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to make sure we're caught up, and we can then make sure that we're on track for our hold on a second. Make sure that we're this is crazy. Yeah, Bhupala, you are right on time. So you're good to go, man. I just need to find our chat. For some reason, I'm not finding it, but don't worry, I will get this taken care of. Here we go. All right. So okay. So here we are. So if you looked at today's agenda, you will have seen that the study session has a little bit of a schedule that will follow mostly. We will make sure that we take care of that momentarily. And I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that the first thing we were going to look at was drugs, and then we were going to look at identifying examples of classical or operant or observational learning, and then maybe we do some test questions as a review. So I've added a couple things into the process so that we can make sure that you're as conditioned as can be. And we'll make sure, and I set it on low latency so that we would make sure that it would be a little easier to follow tonight, but I didn't plan on Kahoot it or anything like that, so that we didn't have any major technical difficulties. So with that being said, the test questions, right now it'd be a minimum of 50. I may go higher. I haven't finished it altogether. So Kate Leonard has asked if there are a lot of questions based on modules 28 to 30. There'll be some questions based upon those areas. We're going to talk a little bit about cognition part of learning with observational learning. We'll talk a little bit tonight about latent learning versus insight learning, and those sorts of things, which if you watched the rest of the PowerPoint, or excuse me, if you watch the rest of the crash course that we looked at today for the Bobo beatdown, that should have given you a pretty good concept on that. Only a few questions really that are going to be related to sleep and states of consciousness as far as sleep and drugs go, which is what I had indicated. And again, spread the word that we won't have any FRQ tomorrow, because we can start the next unit and get going on that as fast as we can. And that way we can try to make up for some of that lost time and make sure that we can hit FRQs a little heavier between now and midterm. So we're good. That being said, let us get going. And the first thing that I think we're going to start with is I wanted to look at schedules of reinforcement a little closer with you, since that's something that's kind of important. So what I want you to do is I'm going to switch the screen to a Word document. And that Word document will have a couple things that you may want to jot down to help with the activity. And so I'm going to put that up for just a second and pause while you guys maybe write a couple things down there. And then that will give you a couple minutes to be able to get going and share responses with us on the live chat. So here's schedules of reinforcement. And we were looking at reinforcement today in class. I think we did a pretty good job with that. I'm pretty glad to see what you guys came up with today. But take a look at this, especially at the instructions. And then we're going to go through and we're going to kind of take a look at the examples here. I'm going to black out simply so you guys don't just go off on a wild goose chase. Take a second to write down maybe some of the bolded terms there, and then we'll get going in just a second on that. So like I said, I'll pause for a moment, get that written down if you choose to do so, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so you should have all that written down. And let's take a quick look at these and see what you guys come up with. So, look at you, Jennifer Tong, you just got going. Woo. Okay, so I don't know, what is the issue that you're having with the sound, Elaine? Did you just hear lots of random noise for a minute? Okay, I'm not seeing a response on that. So just thinking you probably just heard some water turn on in my kitchen and you heard some crinkling. So not a big issue. Let's look at this. So when we're looking at schedules of reinforcement, the other thing I want you to think about is is whether or not you have, what kind of likelihood would this be in terms of ensuring that the behavior would continue? So Leo, you said it sounds like garbled music. Can you hear me coming across okay? Okay, so let me take a look here at a couple things. Maybe I just need to adjust the microphone settings. I think what you're hearing is that you're just hearing it pick up background noise from my from the other room, from people in my house who are watching the television. So give me just a moment, and we'll see if I can do something with that. I can't really adjust the microphone sensitivity without doing some reading. So I think that might be just all there is to that. Okay, thank you, Derek. All right, so taking a look at the schedule of reinforcement. If somebody was paid $10 for every 20 puzzles solved, what would be the schedule of reinforcement in this particular case? Kate Leonard says fixed ratio, says Praneeth, Leo, Barai, Derek, you all say fixed ratio. Okay, so if we're looking at fixed ratio, then what is making this a fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement? Every 20 puzzles. So for every blah, you get blah, Derek says. So every 20 puzzles, you get $10. So it's based on repetition, Kate says. All right, so I'm gonna write here, I'm gonna bold, based on repetition, and the same every 20 puzzles, you get $10. So is this more likely or less likely to encourage the behavior? Derek says it encourages. Okay, so if it is going to encourage the behavior, why does it encourage the behavior? It provides some benefit. Okay. Tax acquisition, Praneeth says, but less resistant to extinction. Okay, so in this case, you're looking at whether or not, when we're looking at more or less likely to encourage the behavior. In other words, what's more likely to make sure that the behavior doesn't go extinct, and what keeps it going? So when Leo says more or less likely than what, we're looking at what would keep the behavior happening as a reinforcement. So we know that there's a reinforcement of $10 every time 20 puzzles are solved. And so you do get positive reinforcement So there's, as Derek said, you do get some benefit for accomplishing a task. But when we're looking at the idea of this would be less resistant to extinction, so that we can make sure that we know that you have or the person has an idea that, they definitely get something for something. They get $10 for 20 puzzles. So it would keep them a little more likely to keep the behavior and encourage it to keep going. So, okay, let's look at number 2, where it says studying for a class that has a surprise quizzes. Are we looking at fixed interval, fixed ratio, variable interval, or variable ratio? Derek says variable interval, so does David, so does Mariah. Praneeth says variable interval, Elaine says it, so does Sam. It looks like variable interval is the answer du jour. So yes, you are correct. Now, how do we define, a variable interval schedule? The keyword is random. I like that. Okay, so the keyword is random. There's surprise quizzes. You never know when they're going to happen. And randomly occurs after a period of time. Sporadic timing, okay. And is this going to be more or less resistant to extinction? Leo and Derek have both said this is more resistant to extinction. So why? Leo says, you don't know when you will be rewarded for the behavior, so you will continue to perform the behavior without a reward. So it would encourage for longer. So it would encourage the behavior, and then you are saying, actually, Leo, it would be less resistance to extinction. Right? Am I restating that correctly? Derek says because it is random. So you're correct. So Sam says, totally understands that it's variable, but can we explain a little more why it's interval and not ratio? So you can't plan for it, so instead you always do it. Derek says because it's not during behavior. Mariah says because it's not a number, it's whenever you get the test. And because you would perform the behavior for longer without a reward, it is less likely to suffer from extinction. Derek then says ratio is having to do randomly when behavior occurs. So I think, Derek, did you mean interval? Ooh, we don't want that. So in the case of what your question is, Sam, you wanted to know why it's a variable interval, because a variable interval, what that would mean is that you never really have an idea as to when the interval will come. It's going to happen. You're going to get surprise quizzes, but it's variable because you just don't know when it will happen. Whereas variable ratio would say that I'd give you a quiz after every 3 lessons, and then I give you a quiz after the next 5, and then I give you a quiz after the next 3 again. In other words, there's a specific ratio that's there. You just don't know when it will be. And so it could be for every 7 lessons, you get a quiz. And then in that particular case, there may be an average where it comes out to be an average of every 4 lessons gets 1 quiz, a 4-to-1 ratio. But you don't really know when those ratios will come, and they don't happen always predictably. If that makes sense. In the scenario for number 2, Sam says, so in that scenario, would they reference a random ratio? No, in this particular case, timing equals the interval. Like Leo just said that. So in other words, the interval is not fixed to any particular ratio. There's no specific average. I could give you a quiz every day. I could give you a quiz every 15 days. It just could come whenever. There's really no rhyme or reason as to when the quiz will come, just that they eventually will come, and you know as a class then to expect that there will be a quiz. Whereas when you're looking at a variable ratio schedule, you still don't know where the rhyme or reason is, but maybe I do. And I know that on average, you're going to have, for every 5 lessons, there'll be 1 quiz. And that average might pan out to be every couple days and maybe a week or 2 in between. But when it's all said and done, I can average out and say there was an average of a 5-to-1 ratio of lessons to quiz. Oh, I see what you're saying, Sam. You were asking specifically to number 2. I get it. So, perfect. Okay, nice. But I think we all hit it there. So if we're looking at slot machines, these are a classic example of this particular schedule of reinforcement. What is that? Derek says variable ratio. Sorry, excuse me. So, David Johnson, you said in a perfect world, it's variable ratio. So, yeah, so in general, slot machines operate on this particular principle. The schedule can't be related to time, you said, Derek. So thought schedule kind of messed it up for me. Okay, those schedule kind of messed it up for me. I guess schedule cannot be related to time. So don't look at it as time in this particular sense, Derek. It's really literally the schedules of reinforcement, at what point they occur. Don't think of schedule as done in advance. Okay. Because repeating the behavior makes it more likely that it will happen, and the repetition is random. Yeah, Sam. So in this particular case, this is where we can see that it's totally random repetition. We know it's going to pay off sometime. But we don't know when that will happen. So therefore, is it more or less likely to keep the behavior going? So Leo said, well, if it's truly random, it may never pay off. So in that particular sense, you have a point in the idea that it may never pay off. That's true. But what you want to do, going back to what Derek said would a slot machine be more likely to be keyed as a variable ratio schedule? And so if you watch the video link I sent out to you today, so some of you got to see it today in third period because there was a question that came up for it. So I made sure I had a video queued for you. And the video made it a point of saying that the slot machine is like a classic example of variable ratio, because at some point, a slot machine is designed to pay off. And so, Leo, in terms of gambling, which I wouldn't expect any of you to have any familiarity with, but in terms of a slot machine, the principle of a slot machine is that you'll get some sort of payoff. It may not be the jackpot, but at some point, you can get some sort of payoff that will occur if you stay at the machine long enough. So it does work on a variable ratio schedule in that particular sense. You just don't know when it will happen. And this is where they found that in this case of slot machines, it's very addicting to some people because they don't want to leave because they're afraid that when they leave, the next person that comes to that machine is going to be the one that gets the payoff that should have been theirs. So in that particular sense, you only know what it may never pay off if it's taking your grandpa's money, Leo said. So that's pretty good. Yeah. So is this more likely or less likely to become extinct? I mean, is it more resistant to extinction or less resistant? Goche says it's more resistant. Yes, it's more likely to encourage the behavior as opposed to discourage it. So, in that sense, if you really think about it, everything we're doing is going to be more likely to encourage the behavior to continue. That's what reinforcement by definition is supposed to be. But if we're looking at extinction, then we got to look at it from that some point. Leo says he only has gambling experience when it comes to taking his grandpa's money. Okay, so it doesn't mean it never pays off for grandpa. It just means it takes his money. So, okay, let's look at fishing in a lake in the summer. I'm going to change that. It should be fishing at a lake in the summer. Derek says variable interval. Sam says that. Kate says that. Mariah says that. Jennifer says that. So we got all kinds of variable intervals going on here. So if you look at it from that respect, you have a variable interval, and the variable interval is correct. What makes it a variable interval? I mean, doesn't the summer come every year? Okay, so Derek and Leo. Derek, you said it's a random occurrence of fish caught during some period of time. Leo says it could be variable ratio if you fish with more than one line in the water. So Leo, I would say that's definitely adding way more to the scenario than that's just there. And don't think of it as, you guys are taking a really interesting spin on this, and maybe I'm the one that's taking the different spin on it. If you look at it from my standpoint, I would say if you look at time frame, since we're always looking at time, is time a major factor that would cause a favorable outcome? Sorry. I wasn't looking at it as number of fish caught, or the success at catching fish. I was looking at it from, you know that there's going to be a reinforcement, but the reinforcement is catching the fish. So I'm talking myself right out of what I was thinking on this one. I was thinking more that, you don't know when in the summer it's going to happen, but you know it's going to happen. So I guess you wouldn't continue to fish in summertime at any given lake if there is no fish to be caught. But so I guess you could look at it either way. I think if you did look at it from the number of fish to be caught, it still works in terms of variable interval, because you don't know when it may happen. I was looking at it from, it doesn't specify, fishing at a lake in July 3rd of the summer. But if there were multiple instances of catching random objects and some of them were fish, it could be variable ratio. But here's the deal when it comes to fishing. Paula says it's not like you have multiple instances of catching, of which some are catching fish. Okay, so you guys are really going deep on this one. Think of it like this. It's variable interval, because you don't know if you're going to actually have a successful catch of fish. We don't want to worry about random objects. And so there's no fixed ratio to catching anything in the water. Theoretically, you can't see into the water being on the surface, and you wouldn't know what's there to catch. So you're going off of a kind of a game of chance in that respect. So in this scenario, you assume that you're going to catch a fish and that there's a variable interval at which those fish will end up biting on the line. There's no fixed ratio, there's no variable ratio, and there's no fixed interval for that matter. It's going to be very variable on when that would happen. So remember, in AP Psych, they're not going to ask you for all the exceptions that could make it one way or the other. They're asking you simply, based upon the example that you have, what is this one? So Leo just said something. He said he understood what the question is looking for. He just wanted to point out the other option. And yeah, I see totally what you're doing there. What I'm trying to make sure I do from the teacher standpoint is that when you're presented with scenarios that could look like this, that you can accurately describe what that scenario is giving you with no other questions or exceptions added to it. Because you guys are going to have to take lots of multiple choice questions with this. And let's take away the writing for just a moment. But with multiple choice questions, they're not going to present you with, in this scenario, that could be the answer, or in this scenario, this could be the answer. It's the scenario they've given you. What is the answer? And so I'm trying to train you guys not to think of all the exceptions unless it's important to know the exceptions. So when you're looking at things like schedules of reinforcement, if there's an exception to be accounted for, it would be provided in the example that you have. Or if you were to have to be familiar with what exceptions to a general thought or theory would be, then you would need to know, and you would need to know that, then it would be very clear in the way it was presented both in the book and to the way we would look at it in class. And in that case, the question you would be asked would be asking you literally, what is this particular theory? And in what cases is that theory not always accepted. So just making sure you guys are aware of why sometimes I'm like, don't read more into the question. It's not that I don't want you to think of, I don't want you to think critically. Although I will hold, there are times when AP is not as critical thinking as some would like it to be. But in some cases, when we're dealing with psychology, and especially with multiple choice tests, you have to go with what is given. If the first thing out of your mouth is, but in this case, then you're going to be in a very dangerous game with the multiple choice test. Because remember, multiple choice test can't answer you back and reason with you. The multiple choice test, if it is doing that, if it's answering you back, then we need to talk, because that's not normal. It would be considered abnormal psychology. So let's look at speed traps on highways. Sam asks, is it variable ratio? Derek says variable ratio. Leo says, can you say what a speed trap is? Okay. So Samantha says, is that where the police wait? Correct. So actually a speed trap is, see if I can find you something really quick. Give me one moment. A speed trap is basically let me give you an example here with the screens. Let's see here. Give me just a second, boys and girls, and I'll have a speed trap here for you. So if you look here, speed limit enforcement is essentially where they check to see that vehicles are complying with the speed limit enforced on roads and highways. So in other words, they might use speed cameras or radar, and in those particular cases, they might literally, they might actually catch you speeding without you knowing with the cameras. So here is the idea, is the perception that speed limits in a given location are being set and enforced primarily to collect revenue rather than improve traffic safety has led to controversy. So a speed trap, if you look at it that way, is the idea that people believe that you're having essentially an unfair situation where they hide out and they purposefully go to an area where people might be more likely to speed. So for example, on a downhill, at the very bottom of the hill, you're more likely to find people exceeding the speed limit just because of inertia and gravity. But so some would say that that's just a total speed trap. Or in some cases, you'll see where a speed limit might say 45, and then a quarter of a mile down the road, it will drop to 30. And what that would mean is that as soon as you see the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit sign, it means you're in that zone, but you've been going 45. It's a drastic drop in speed as opposed to a gradual one. So if they sit there right where that 30-mile-per-hour sign is, and they sit there and they keep getting you, then you could get a ticket, and that would be more likely to give you the ticket because you technically are speeding. So they would call that a speed trap as well. Okay, so looking at the speed trap, and now that you understand what a speed trap is, let's take a look again at our examples. for schedules of reinforcement. So we're looking at speed traps on highways. Let's see. So now that we have it defined, I'm looking at your chat. Derek says variable interval. Sam asks why. Sam says, could it be ratio because time has nothing to do with where they are, where they are and how frequently they're spaced. Jennifer says, oh, I guess it would be variable ratio. Jennifer then says, I can see how it's variable intervals. Speed traps are only set up at certain times of the day. And Derek says, it's VI, I think. Leo says, sneaky beaky like. So let's take a look at it really quick. So if you're looking at this from the standpoint of someone's going to get a ticket, the point of the speed trap is to catch people speeding. But think of it like this. Is every car that's going to go by, is every car going to get a ticket? And does it tell you that for every 5 speeding cars, 1 gets a ticket? Derek says no. So, Derek, no, every car is not going to get a ticket? It's just time whenever a speeding car passes past it. A speeding car passes the speed trap. So, you guys have to look at it like this. What is the definition of a ratio? What is a definition of a ratio? Ratio equals repetition. It has been suggested. That's not entirely correct. Leo says number of inputs related to number of outputs. So if we look at a ratio, and we're saying that we're going to say every 2 apples gets 1 orange. We would express it like that. Janina says the answer is A. Janina, you're not even in sight. So if you're looking here, whoops, I didn't mean that. My bad. If we're looking here, in that little example I just highlighted to you, we would say every 2 apples gets 1 orange, correct? And we'd express it as 2:1, 2 to 1. Leo says yes. Okay, so now, look at this example. About speed traps on highways. The answer is variable interval. Now, I just explained to you that 2 apples gets 1 orange, and we'd say 2 to 1. So that's a ratio. Why isn't this a ratio? Leo, bingo. This doesn't give you any information about when a car gets a ticket. All we know is that if there's a speed trap, there will be a point in which some car gets a ticket. Not every car, not every 5 cars. It's not like this, where it says every 20 puzzles gets $10. It just says speed traps on highways. Speed traps imply someone is going to get a ticket. You were right, Derek. You were right. Is Praneeth still here? You know what, Derek? Praneeth wasn't getting on this one. So, for those of you who are saying that it's variable ratio, do you understand why it's not variable ratio? So Sam says interval implies time, so you're confused. So, Sam, I'm glad you said that. So let's look at it like this, okay? Think of it in the sense that everything's going to involve time. It's just a matter of when the time occurs. So let's say the time is at what point something is going to be reinforced or punished, okay? So if you look at it from the standpoint of speed traps are going to provide a positive punishment by giving somebody a ticket. Therefore, it's going to be more likely to extinguish speeding behavior. But you have no idea who's going to get the ticket, when there's going to be a ticket. In fact, you have no idea if they're even there, because you're speeding down the highway, boop, 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 and you just, you run right past the cop. You don't even see because the police officer's hiding. So when you look at that, in that regard, think of it like this. The time that it's going to happen is very random. It's going to happen. You just don't know when they're going to happen. That makes it a variable interval. So Leo says, because you don't know when the cop is going to be there. Random timing equals variable interval. Yes. That's a good way of putting it. The time where somebody gets a ticket is random. So, and I get why this could be a little confusing, because it doesn't say that. It's implied with speed traps. It's assuming you know what a speed trap is. Okay. So for the product door-to-door, the next one, Derek has said it could be variable interval, or it's variable ratio. Leo says variable ratio. Derek says, I don't know. Jennifer says fixed ratio. This one is terrible. And I'll tell you what the designer of the lesson said. The designer of the lesson says it's variable ratio, but terrible example, because we don't know. It's random, David says, right? And I would say yes. Sam would say every house meeting ratio. So what I'm telling you is that this is not a good example of a variable ratio personally. So door to door is fixed if you get someone to buy at every house. Right, and that's where Eric, what you said there is really important, because it is definitely variable, but I don't like the idea that it's a variable ratio. If you asked me, this would be a variable interval. And even then, what that would say to me, this assumes variable interval assumes you sell to someone and that someone is willing to buy. The example doesn't say this. So variable ratio would say that you would sell to every third house to an average, or something like that. Right, Sam, you say it doesn't give you enough info, and you're correct. This is not a great example at all, because you don't know enough information here to judge. And I would never put that on a test. But I wanted to use it as an example of saying, if you were to ask me by itself, I would say this is a variable interval, because if you assume somebody buys something, at some point, there will be that point in time they buy it. But it's going to be very random at when they would do that. That's assuming somebody buys something, and you could spend 2 weeks going door to door and not sell a thing. So it's a terrible, terrible, terrible example. So yeah, Sam, don't stress over this one. And literally, it's a terrible example. It's not one that I would use. I wanted to let you see how you could think about that one, and that's a perfect example where you'd have to read in it, like Derek said, and you're not supposed to read into it. So there you go. Let's look at this one. Now, I'm going to take a bet that one of you out there actually gets clothes out of the dryer once the dryer finishes. So when the dryer buzzes, I'm going to say once the dryer is finished. Now, before we get into what this is, you have to look at what the benefit is here. Why would you get the clothes out of the dryer right when it's finished? Leo says, if you need to wear them. Yes, but let's assume you're not doing laundry. All right, so the clothes are warm, they smell good, and they don't wrinkle. Right. For the feels good, man. Okay, nice. Okay. You dive into the laundry, it's warm. Maybe if there's a blanket or towel in there. All right, so let's take a look at this really quick. So when you get clothes out of the dryer, once the dryer is finished, if it has an alert buzzer on it, then when the dryer buzzes. Back in the day, there was a buzzer. Now they might make a pleasant tone, or they just, like mine does, stop. So in that particular case, you guys were saying that it was a fixed interval. Is that what you were saying? just go in with your laundry to make it clean. First of all, I'm really glad to see that some of you understand why you get the clothes out of the dryer, because it assumes that maybe you've actually done some laundry. Derek, why don't you just go to why don't you just go in the shower? And then you and the clothes get clean at the same time, and then you can just like use a hair dryer. So Leo says it takes a specific amount of time for your dryer to finish. So we know that whatever time that is, if it's 30 minutes or an hour, there's an interval at which you do that. So Derek's going to put getting in the shower in full clothes and using a hair dryer to dry everything so that both clothes and person get clean at the same time. He's going to put that on his bucket list, and I think that should be put onto YouTube. So looking at the next one, going up a staircase to reach a landing with a nice view. Leo, peel off your animal slayer skin. Yuck. I'm with you on that one, Sam. That's gross. Jennifer Tong and Leo, you both have said fixed ratio. Why? Unless the view is sometimes ugly. What makes it a fixed ratio? You go up the stairs and there's the view. 1-to-1. Guaranteed a pretty view by going up the stairs. And Eric says, of course, if it's Hogwarts, the stairs will change, direction and all of that while you're on them. So, and Mariah says, because you go up a certain number of stairs. Okay, so that works too. And yeah, and you go up every blank number of stairs to get some nice view. So it's fixed every time. There's one flight of stairs, or there's 22 stairs to get to the view. And every time, as Jennifer said, every time you go up there, there's a view. So for every one time you go up the stairs, there's one pretty view. So that would be considered that. Skip number 9. Go to number 10. Playing bingo. Goche says, by the way, let's wait on number 10. Goche says, what if it is talking about the time it takes to go up the stairs? So Goche, on that particular one, it would tell you the time. It doesn't specify that, so you can't factor time into it. Sam says, fixed relating to the stairs, not the decision making. Correct. Or fixed, I'm sorry, Sam, fixed is relating to the view, the reinforcement. You go up the stairs to see the nice view. So for every one view, there's one set of stairs, let's say. If there were 2 flights of stairs, then you'd have to go up 2 to 1. It'd still be a fixed ratio. Now, looking at number 10, playing bingo. Derek has said virtual reinforcement, virtual ratio. I keep wanting to say virtual reality so bad. Virtual ratio. Jennifer says virtual ratio. Leo says that, and yes, it's virtual ratio. There will be variable virtual, for God's sakes, it's late. All right, so you're correct on this one. There's a variable ratio on this. There will be a payoff. Someone is going to get a bingo. It could happen after 5 numbers are drawn. Or 25. At some point, someone's going to get a bingo. So there will be one payoff, but when that payoff happens is variable. So it's variable ratio. Always going to be 1. Let's look at number 11. Getting a paycheck, which is yay, money, reward for work at the end of 2 weeks. So Sam says fixed interval. Jennifer says fixed ratio. And then she changed it. Mariah says fixed interval. Jennifer has changed that to fixed interval. And you guys are all correct. It's not a ratio of, whoa, crazy. It is fixed interval because every 2 weeks you get one paycheck. Every week, every 2 weeks. So nicely done. So there's random drug testing there's random drug testing, and at some point there's going to be possibly a positive test result, which could you lose your job. So on random drug testing, Sam has started us off by saying virtual variable interval, because Leo has done as well. I need one more to make it official. There's got to be 4 answers. There we go. Variable interval. You are correct. Okay, so I'm going to move off of the schedules of reinforcement. Just remember, on schedules of reinforcement, I sent you out a remind. And on that remind, I'm going to send it again to you right now, even though it's 9:15. I'm going to put it up there for you, sorry. On that remind earlier, I said you should look at this video. So if you look, let's go, hold on. You look at that video, it's going to get you it's going to get you a little Khan Academy lesson on schedules of reinforcement, and it's about 7 minutes, and I don't think you could make it any clearer for you. So go Jay. Everything that everyone has said is correct. It's an interval at a fixed interval of 2 weeks. You're going to get one. Then it's going to be one paycheck. Every 14 days, one paycheck. Period. Eric says interval is a better answer, but ratio is still valid. Correct. I think it would depend, Eric, on how it was worded. If it said for every 1 week or for every one paycheck equals 2 weeks work, then I think it would be more valid to say a ratio, a fixed ratio. But it wasn't described that way. In the example given, you could work 80 hours or 10 hours. You could work 14 days or 10 days. You're going to get a paycheck every 14 days. Okay, so I'm telling you guys, watch this video. It's beautiful. It is an inspiring piece of educational work, and it will completely help you understand this. Okay? Okay. Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay, so on that note, let's take a quick little break, and we'll consider this your commercial break, because we're basically just over an hour in, and then we'll move into looking at a couple of other examples of things to help you review, and we'll take some questions, and then we'll go from there. So for the moment, let's take a quick break. I'll be right back. Welcome back. Okay, so we are going to transition and we're going to look at some drugs. Now remember, drugs are bad, okay? Okay, so, well, no, it wasn't quite Diet Coke time, Derek, because I don't have very much left. But it could have been Diet Coke time. It was actually let the dog out time. So, yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at Daniel. No, I haven't painted that part of the wall. So I've got some Skinner imagery up here. And I thought that was really kind of funny. So hipster Skinner was studying behavior before it was cool. All right. Let's just take a quick look at drugs because they're bad, okay? Okay, so let's look at this. Let's take a look at this particular little ditty, Body on Drugs. So you're not looking at the episode of Curiosity, but let's don't even work on these particular examples, but let's take a look at what kind of drug first is marijuana. What class of drugs is marijuana? So Jennifer says, what's the question? The question again is, what is the class of drug? What kind of drug is it? So Sam says that THC is the main ingredient. So she says it's a hallucinogen. Leo, you gave the right answer. It's both. It is a mild hallucinogen because of the THC, as Sam pointed out, and it acts as a depressant on the nervous system. So, what could be likely effects of marijuana on the body and the brain? What could that be, you ask? Well, let's take a look. Give me a second. I'll give you something here. So it can increase sensations. What do you mean by sensations? Leo says it only brings out vividness of sensory stimuli, but cannot cause a full-blown trip. Correct? Yes, and Derek, you said sight and sound, since they're a little bit more sensitive, you're going to see some effects on sight and sound. So we know that marijuana is going to cause, vivid can cause, let's change that to can cause vividness of sensory stimuli, such as sight, stimuli, just sight and hearing. And Derek says relaxing effect similar to alcohol. It can, it can cause a lowering of inhibitions. I think is good. I think if you all saw marijuana, you could probably get that because you've seen that before. So nicely done. We'll leave that at that. Looking at meth. What kind of drug is meth? Leo says it's a stimulant. Sam says it's a stimulant, and I'm going to leave it there because it is. You said that meth, Sam, you said it affects, it's addictive, reduces baseline dopamine levels. And what does dopamine do? Speeds up bodily functions in an excitatory way. So if you look, major excitatory neurotransmitter. Nice, nice, nice. So if you look at stimulants in general, let's take a look at stimulants as a general category. Nice, 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 nice. So if you're looking at stimulants in general, if you look at let me give you something here to look at. Hi, me again for just a second. Give me a moment, and we're going to look at this for just a moment. Stimulants are drugs that excite neural activity and speed up body functions, just like you just said. And stimulants can act actually much in the same way that even cocaine does. So it looks at like methylphenidate for just a moment. Methylphenidate is Ritalin. Ritalin is a drug used for ADHD. And so they both act on dopamine sites in the brain. And we know that dopamine is associated with attention and pleasure. And so when you look at, this is what cocaine does to the brain, and this is what methylphenidate does in the brain. So you can see which areas are showing high levels of activity in yellow and red. But this did say that in the study, people were given their drug intravenously, that if you take methylphenidate, if you take Ritalin, methylphenidate is going to act much more slowly on your dopamine receptions. And Leo is pointing out the drug here that I referred to earlier as far as people who do drugs. So if you look at that, yes, you're correct. And so if you look at amphetamines and methamphetamines, we're talking about meth, that's this. And if you're looking at meth, you're right, it can cause pockmarks on the skin because, well, actually it's because people are scratching at their skin. And it definitely horribly ages you. If we looked at some of those pictures, it basically does the same thing as an amphetamine as far as it can suppress appetite, it can increase concentration and reduce fatigue. Methamphetamine can basically keep you up literally for days. It can increase anxiety and irritability. But if you look here, meth is essentially illegal. It's manufactured in street labs. There's nothing natural about it, really. Someone can then crash, and then if they do crash after using for a while, eventually it can cause some major issues. And as Sam pointed out, it reduces the baseline dopamine levels. And when it does that, it can leave you with permanently depressed functioning in the brain. So if you look at this particular graphic, they've looked at what brain decay happens. And if you look here, it can affect memory, emotion, and reward systems. And then we can see where there's literally a loss of brain tissue. And if you look, that's where the reddish color is, where there's at least a 5% loss of brain tissue. In terms of it kind of shrinks that area, these areas of the brain. And look where it has the areas of the greatest loss. It's in the emotion and reward system and the limbic system in this area, and in the memory area with the hippocampus. So it's very much, it's a terrible drug. And so it can definitely cause some horrible side effects. So yes, nicely said. Okay, so yeah, you can actually, you're right, it does come back to the occipital lobe as well. So very good point. So let's take a look at the next one then. As we go back to the screen we want to look at. What about heroin? What kind of drug is heroin? Is it a depressant? Samantha says yes. And so far, of the 23 of you online, Leo and Samantha are the only two talking, which means you've done your studying. I'm really happy to see that. So Samantha says it can lessen pain and anxiety. Leo says possibly most addictive. Oh, how many of you are waiting for me to go to the a slide? Give me a moment. Do I not have one on heroin? That's crazy. Give me a second. That's nuts. I can't believe I wouldn't have one. Here we go. Me bad. All right. So, what kind of family of drugs? I mean, where is heroin derived, I should say? Right. It's from opium. So looking at this, just keep in mind that opium is when you have derivatives of opium or morphine and heroin, and it depresses or reduces neural activity. And as Sam put out, thanks, Kate. Good to see you there. Sam pointed out it does lessen pain and anxiety. They're very, very addictive. Thanks, Praneeth. I'm late to that party, right, buddy? So, looking at heroin, you can feel really, really good for about 3 to 5 hours, but then you get this amazing craving for another fix of it. And one of the things that they use for it is methadone to try to treat it. And the methadone is an interesting drug because it can actually become addictive itself. But one of the things with heroin is that it is literally one in which the higher the dosage is given, the more people don't get high. Leo says that's why they sometimes give you fentanyl for wisdom teeth surgery. I don't know that I got fentanyl for that when I had my wisdom teeth done, but that was 300 years ago. So that's possible. When you look at drugs in general, look at the idea that drugs are something in which you can get dependent on very easily. And heroin is one where it's very, very important to understand that a repeated exposure makes the drug's effect lessen. So in other words, if you keep taking, let's say, 10 cc's of an injected amount of heroin, eventually that won't necessarily get you high any longer. So you'd have to increase the dosage, but the more you increase the dosage, then the more that it would take for the drug to actually make you feel high, and then it would become more and more toxic to the body than it already is. So, so that's very important to understand with regard to heroin. So heroin is going to be, when you're looking at heroin, the other things it can do is it can cause, for example, it can cause mild hallucinations. It can cause impression in the brain. One of the biggest signs of heroin is pupil constriction. People who have currently used heroin are going to literally, their pupils will come to a sharp pinpoint. They're very, very tiny and small. It can cause slurred speech. It can, when high dosages, can start respiratory depression. So in other words, it makes it harder to breathe. And then over time, it can literally lead to abscesses in the brain. It can lead to hepatitis and HIV if you're sharing needles that are not sterile. And Praneeth is that's pretty accurate to say in general. I think that you can find brain issues with most of these drugs when there's high usage, or when there's high usage of them. So nicely said. Okay, let's take a quick look back at the chart that we were looking at. Un momento, por favor. Let's go back to body and drugs. Let's take a look at cocaine. And let's take a look what kind of drug. Praneeth says stimulant. So does Leo. It is a stimulant. And so if we're looking at stimulants, we know it's going to increase neural activity. It's going to also cause it's going to speed up your bodily functions, heart rate, for example, those sorts of things. So when you're looking at these things, it can definitely become very dangerous as far as that goes. Leo's pointed out it's highly addicted. Sam agrees. Kate agrees it's a stimulant, and short-lived high builds tolerance. So one of the things that we know is that it's, and actually there are lots of derivatives of cocaine, like Novocaine. Did you know that it was actually, Novocaine is actually a derivative of it. But when you're looking at it, it reaches the brain in seconds in terms of crossing the blood-brain barrier. And it is, as you pointed out, Leo, it's flooded with dopamine. So it's very pleasurable. And it can provide an intense euphoria. So how do we define euphoria? a very good sense of well-being, a very, very pleasurable, happy state. And while the high is lasting, you'll be very, very, everything's okay. Everything's great when you're euphoric. Everything's wonderful. And then it can give you mental alertness. You can definitely feel very, very alert. You can feel very self-confident, interestingly enough, on cocaine, but it doesn't last long. And so what we'll do is it will flood the brain of dopamine because it blocks the reuptake. But once it dies off, then it can lead to a pretty intense fall. And so then somebody might take a hit of cocaine again, and therefore they're trying to prolong it. Can increase aggression because again, you're looking at speeding up bodily functions, and it's going to excite neural activity, and so you can definitely see that. Now, I am pretty sure that last week when we did the drugs are bad, I actually don't know if I put this online for you. I don't think I did put it online for you because I said that there was a chart in your book that if you looked at the chart in your book, you were going to be in really nice shape. So the chart in your book would look something like this, where you can understand the psychoactive drugs in terms of the depressants or stimulants, or even if they move into the hallucinogenic realm. So if you take a look at that chart in your book and you have an idea of that chart, you're going to have a really good idea of what you would need to know in terms of anything to do with drugs. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So you want to know about psychoactive drugs. And if you want to know in general, just understanding that drugs alter perception and mood. They impact consciousness as far as your state of consciousness. Psychoactive drugs can produce tolerance, as we pointed out. Usually these drugs, especially if addiction occurs, will produce a withdrawal effect, where withdrawal can be very, very unpleasant. When it says undesirable, that's an understatement. Generally, withdrawal can be very, very unpleasant. They have a high ability to become dependent, which means literally that when you don't have the drug, there's literally physical pain, and then intense cravings for the drugs because your body literally is physically craving the chemical itself. And of course, there's a psychological dependence in the sense that your body, you might consciously feel you need the drug for whatever reason you're taking the drug to begin with. Addiction is very important in this particular case because addiction is when there's obviously that there's adverse consequences, but the drugs, these can quickly corrupt your way of thinking. Many times when somebody has reached a level of addiction, they voluntarily generally don't overcome their addiction. They usually almost have to be forced into it, whether it's by being in trouble with law enforcement or the family stages an intervention. It's not the same thing as things that we consider to be repetitive pleasures. Repetitive pleasure-seeking behavior. So, like, for example, some people get pleasure when they are on their cell phones. They may not, feel euphoric, but it pleases them to be on their cell phones. We might say, well, you're addicted to your phone. It's not literally the same thing. This is when you have literally your body becomes addicted to it and literally is dependent on them in some way. Thank you, Derek. And Leo asked, can withdrawal symptoms be potentially fatal? Yes, they can, especially if you are very, very dependent on them. When you're looking at, for example, if you look at caffeine, which has the same kind of effect as nicotine, which you obviously get from tobacco, caffeine provides energy. As you know, it's found in things like Diet Coke, but when people come up to it, it's physically addictive, and they can experience major withdrawal symptoms, literally to the point of needing some sort of medical attention. So if you look at give me just a moment, I'm going to show you something. This might help explain to you the why I drink as much Diet Coke as I do. Let me show you something. One of the things that you're going to learn about later is called the DSM, the Bible of psychology, basically, in terms of diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders. So symptoms can include basically really bad headaches, for example. It's one of the most persistent things that can last for a while. There can be changes in mood, difficulty concentrating, and fatigue are also common. Here's one that they've discovered since 2013. People can experience flu-like symptoms such as nausea, vomiting, and achiness. They can increase their appetite. They can increase sleeplessness. It can go on for weeks. And interestingly enough, with caffeine, why it's so addictive and people don't really get off of it, the symptoms can disappear almost instantly if consumption resumes. So here's one of the things that I've been telling you in my own situation. There's a genetic influence on the addiction. It looks like it's heritable, and so withdrawal symptoms and addiction dependence are basically both of those. When you look at the tolerance effects, essentially, it's highly chronic campaign can literally result with dependence. And people generally are doing it to avoid symptoms of withdrawal. So there you go. There's some of the things you should know about drugs, and we use caffeine as an example. So can you dial back caffeine usage gradually to negate most of the withdrawal symptoms? You could. It's the same thing with regard to, say, like nicotine. When people try to stop smoking, they'll try to cut back on their smoking rates to where their body becomes used to less and less. They call it weaning. It's the same thing that they do with some drugs that cause a bit of a dependence. There are anxiety drugs and antidepressants that sometimes abruptly stopping the medication can cause side effects that, and we wouldn't call them harmful, but they're quite unpleasant. And so then what doctors will do is, when they want to transition you off of the drug, maybe to stop taking it altogether or to try and start a new medication, they'll have you decrease your dosages at a very specific interval over the course of time, so that when you get to the point that you actually do stop it, your body doesn't necessarily feel the withdrawal, or if it does, it's very, very mild. So yeah, I mean, it is something you can wean, you can scale back or wean yourself from the drug, caffeine, nicotine, and I think even maybe with mild addictions to other drugs, but I think it depends upon what kind of drug you're talking about. I think that I can speak to my own personal caffeine addiction, which is it's nasty. And when I say nasty, when it said on the DSM that you can get flu-like symptoms, that's what I experienced personally. I mean, I got sick, and that was not fun in the least. So let's see. We're getting onto the late side of things. Let's do just a couple of looking at some processes of operant conditioning. Give me a second here. And let's put this particular screen up. And let's take a look at some of the processes here of classical conditioning. So what we're looking at is whether or not these scenarios give you generalization, discrimination, extinction, or spontaneous recovery. So let's take a look at your first one here. If you're looking at Sinbad was frightened by a barking, lunging spaniel. Now he's afraid of all other dogs. Is that showing generalization, discrimination, extinction, or spontaneous recovery? Marai says generalization. All right, you're correct. Hooray. Gochi says the same thing, so does Jennifer. All right, then let's look at the next one. Sheila was frightened by a German Shepherd when she was 5, but now she's happy whenever she sees a dog. Generalization, discrimination, extinction, or spontaneous recovery. Kate has said extinction, and ding, 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 you're all correct. At least Kate, Marai, and Kate, Marai. And now Goche. So extinction, hooray. Okay, let's go to the next one. Makoto hates the sight of a bee, but loves to watch hummingbirds. So Marai says discrimination. So does Kate Leonard. Ding, 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 ding. That's discrimination. In other words, Makoto does not necessarily hate the sight of everything that comes her way that flies. She just doesn't like bees. So, okay. Let's take a look at Kim. When Kim was small, she got sick after eating a bad oyster. Now she refuses to eat anything that comes out of the sea. Marai says generalization. Goche says generalization. So does Praneeth. He just says G because he's too cool to type it out, man. Oh gosh, you're not too cool. You're going to spell it out for everybody to see. All right, so generalization. Yes, that is correct. It's not just a specific aversion that has been formed with the association of sick and oyster. It's been now generalized, and then the sickness has been associated to anything sea related. So, awesome. Let's take a look at this one. Angie loves the smell of her grandmother's chocolate chip cookies, but she doesn't like the smell of any other. Only her mother's chocolate chip cookie, grandmother's chocolate chip cookies. Rotate says discrimination, as does Praneeth. Okay, let's take a look. Let's see. Let's look at number 9, pranked. Mariah developed a fear of the water when she fell off a river raft last summer. This year, she took swimming lessons and thought she'd finally overcome her fear of water. She was eagerly looking forward to an upcoming rafting trip. However, as soon as she stepped into that raft, she was instantly terrified. Is that generalization, discrimination, extinction, or spontaneous recovery? Mariah says spontaneous recovery. So does Praneeth. You, children, you are correct. Okay. So we are at the end of our session. Between what you've done in class for practice, what we did tonight, I think you're in very good shape. Looks like probably you might need to brush up a little bit on the drugs. Effects of drugs. Don't brush up on drugs. That's bad. And then you might want to look at a little bit some schedules of reinforcement. Take a look at learning as far as observational learning, like we looked at with Bobodal today as part of the classic regression studies of Bandura. And you want to also make sure that you take a look at, I would say literally, if you watch the end of that crash course that we looked at today, I sent you the link out on Remind. If you don't know where that Remind is on your phone, go to the website. It's on the feed is on the page there, and you can scroll up and find the links from today. Literally, you got to watch 5 minutes of Crash Course. You don't have to write anything down for assignment or anything. So I think that if you watch that and you review that, you're in really, really good shape. If you really, really want to sit and stay up much later, which I wouldn't advocate, as you know, then you could do on YouTube, you could go to Amanda Rice's page, Mrs. Rice, that I've given you some assignments from. She's got some fairly decent short lessons in regard to not only processes of learning from the yes, Tai Chi, circadian rhythm. You don't want your circadian rhythm to get thrown off. Not only does she have good playlists from processes of learning as far as the conditioning and observational learning goes, but if you go to states of consciousness, she has about 5 videos, of which I would not recommend you watch all of them because I'm not currently testing you on them, but they are There's about 15 minutes. One goes over stages of sleep, which you watched for homework, so it would be a review for you. And you also there's one on drugs that you can watch. And so if you, I'm going to give you the link here in just a sec, that you can copy down. If you go to Body on Drugs, I'm just talking to myself as I speak. As I get this ready, I should say not speak. Let me make this something you can see very easily and copy down if you want to give to the playlist for States of Consciousness, which is the one you probably should look at. You watched almost everything in the other one for your homework. But let me screen share that for you for just a second, for those of you who are diehards that are still here. And if you go to the screen I just shared with you, right here in the top is a shortened Google link that'll take you to the YouTube channel playlist for Amanda Rice. And those would be a couple good things that you could watch to get you ready for the exam, apart from the actual, like rereading everything. And if you want to look at a good video on learning from her, that might give you just a little bit more things about things from observational learning. Let me give you that for just a second. Give me one moment, and then I'll answer. I see you just typed a question, Goche, but I saw it out of the corner of my eye, so give me just a moment. If we go to this one, just so that you have something you can look at here. Give me a second. If you go to observational learning, you can watch that video here. That's just the stuff that kind of recaps what we went through in class today, particularly with regard to the crash course we were using as our tool of learning. And Goche, your question, should we go back and watch the rest of that one video we watched for viewing notes, part 1 of 2? One of the two. It was part 2 of operant conditioning, where I said watch only 13 minutes of. You could watch the end of that. If you go through that, the end of that video is essentially the schedules of reinforcement, which we did go over tonight as well. So that could be something that's helpful for you. It wouldn't hurt you, and it's only about 4 or 5 minutes. So it wouldn't be anything that I think is unreasonable to ask you to do. So sure, why not? I think that would be a very helpful thing for you. And give me 1 second on your question there, Tai Chi, and I'll get to that in just a moment. What I'll do here is we're going to put, there's the first link, that's to the playlist on everything to do with the drugs and sleep video. And then on the other one, give me just a moment. I'll get that for you as well. I'm getting sleepy and forgetting where I am in my own windows here. You can go to this one for observational learning. Okay, your question is, Tai Chi says, should we know how to classify the various punishment and reinforcement? I assume you meant various as opposed to vicarious, but and on your answer to that, Tai Chi, you should know how to identify what punishment and reinforcement is and be able to understand whether it's positive or negative in either case, like we did in class today. So you could be presented with scenarios that would ask you to identify which one's at work, or it could ask you to define them. So you're looking for vicarious in terms of like living out positive reinforcement or negative punishment through other people. I see what you're saying. I'm sorry. Are you talking about mirror neurons, Tai Chi, and the centers of the brain that will mirror the feelings of these things when observed? Yes. Okay. Sorry. Tai Chi. When you, if you go to the last part of that, that YouTube video that not YouTube video, crash course video that we watched in class today, that would be sufficient. Between that and the book, that would be a sufficient way of reviewing that information as far as how you might have examples of latent or insight types of learning, or that idea that your brain can register what's happening with other people. So yeah, that would not be a bad thing to do. Any other quick questions? Okay, I'm seeing no other quick questions. No, I'm not going to do an FRQ. One, I need to make sure I give you time to digest the feedback from the other ones, which is coming like intermittently, not intermittently. We're doing too much vocabulary for this late at night, which will be coming imminently. And two, I can use the time to help catch you up so that we have a little more time to be able to work with FRQs between now and May 1st. So yeah, no FRQ. I haven't finished the total length of the test just yet. So I can't give you the actual given number, but it's possible. Okay, on that note, it's time to sleep. We need to, or for me to sleep at least. So we need to get just this show wrapped up and get you on the road to doing well. Do remember that on my website, if you go to the study links, you can go to the multiple choice practice, which is a really good way to make sure that you just put yourself in the game, simulate tomorrow so that you can do as well as possible. I think you're in good hands based upon what I've observed over the course of the week with regard to your practice activities. and I think we're pretty good to go. So thanks for joining me tonight. Those 9 of you that are still out there, you're diehards, love it. And you're going to win the nuclear, you're going to be the leaders in the nuclear war, post-apocalyptic world after the nuclear war, because you've stayed around. So if you have any questions, you can come see me in the morning. If I'm not stuck in a copy room. Fridays can be busy, but otherwise, get a good night's rest and plow forward and be productive in your studying tonight. So, Mariah, I did not make you know about hypnosis for the unit test. We will talk about it with some review before we get to the AP exam. But for the unit test, for the sake of trying to catch up, that's the part of the course that's only 2 to 3% of the AP exam. So that's the content that got a little sacrificed. So, okay. You guys have a great night. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for sticking with it for so long. If you did, I hope you found it helpful. And I will see you tomorrow. Don't stress. I'm not worried about you in the least, and I trust you guys will do just fine. Okay? So, my unlimited love to y'all. Peace out. Deuces.